I'm going to restate that in an American accent. So that
Knower.
knower, know it in your knower.
What did I sound like? Like Noah?
Know it in your know. It sounded like you said know it in your know because the
Yeah.
is so soft.
Thank you for the translation.
Welcome to the Leadr Pulse podcast, the podcast with actionable insights for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. I'm your host, Holly Tate, and Chief Marketing Officer here at Leadr. In our last episode, we got to hear from Matt and Frank about the balance of firefighting versus what's most important to your business right now, and what the role of a CEO really looks like. On today's episode, Frank and Matt unpack how do you actually know those gears to pick? And then Matt and I dive deep in what this looks like for us as leaders and really understanding that clarity drives everything at your organization. So let's take a listen.
Yeah, so that's critical, right? It is actually critical figuring out what the right 4 or 5 things are and to effectively resource them and make them differentiated. So that's not an easy process, and it takes, you do need to understand what you think your customers are telling you. Customer service wasn't the only thing we picked. We had other things that we were focused on. Some of them, are precursors to effectively addressing your customer needs, like fixing your inventory situation, which goes back to your supply chain. You do have to have a comfort level with what your organization needs to really hone in on the 4 or 5 things. In fact, I'd say a lot of organizations, you can see that they don't have that comfort level because they have too damn many priorities. And when you feel like you understand, okay, what is going to drive the economic engine of this business, that gets you down to the 4 or 5 big gears. Now, I believe in we had a very participatory effort with the leadership team on what they were. It wasn't just me going off and coming down from on high saying, here are the 5 things. But when we settled on them, it was those 5 things. There was, prior to my becoming CEO, if you went around Home Depot, you would have seen banners all over the place saying, improve everything you touch, as a mantra for the company. My first comment to our officers at Home Depot was, don't improve everything you touch. We are going to improve these 5 things.
So just 2 minutes with Frank Blake again is like, wait, hold on. I need to go back and listen to those 2 minutes again.
Don't improve anything you touch.
Yeah, that's what he just said. Literally, quote, don't improve everything you touch. That is crazy. I think especially for people who value excellence, I know you do and I do too. It's like, wait, what? You don't need to make that better? Oh man, that's really good. Okay, let me see if I can start from the beginning of those 2 minutes, which felt like it was a whole hour of goodness. He talks about, so you asked him, but how do you know, Frank, the 4 to 5 things? And again, remember, Frank was leading over 500,000 employees, CEO of Home Depot. So I cannot imagine being in the boardroom of that executive team, of probably their whiteboard of different options, picking 4 to 5 things. Blows my mind. It's hard enough for us to just pick 4 to 5 things.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think when he was sharing that, my first thought was actually, it's really scary as an executive when you don't know what the 5 things should be. That's a scary place to be, when you don't actually know what they are, because you feel like you're lacking context. You'll say things like, well, I think the thing we should be focused right now on is like top of funnel lead gen, but I'm not really sure because I don't know X, Y, and Z. And that's scary when you lack all the data points. And that's kind of what he was saying about like making sure you have enough detail and you're involving a lot of people and you don't do it in a silo. But not knowing what the most important 5 things are, and then, like you say, whittling down the list that probably started at 20 and then saying no to the 15 other ones, that can't be a comfortable exercise.
No. And we've tried several different things as an executive team. I've been here 3 years and I can think
We've done every single planning type and goals type under the sun.
We really, really have. And I feel like it hasn't been until the last probably 9 months, like almost a year,
Almost a
that
year.
it feels like we've really dialed it in. I mean, I know we'll always be a work in progress, but it's this was the first, we just kicked off back in February of 2024. We just kicked off our fiscal year because we have a wonky fiscal year, February through January. And this was the first time that we actually announced our entire, like an annual theme with quarterly objectives underneath that. Up until now, we've really kind of done quarter by quarter. So how did you think through that, Matt, as CEO, of like making that shift from quarterly to an annual planning process?
So many of the previous frameworks we used, I felt were either too stuffy, like very, very corporate-y, very complex, or even too simplistic. And then the rat race that I felt like me and the executive team fell into was this sort of quarterly planning cycle. And it just felt like this rat race of like every single quarter, we were either at the beginning of the quarter announcing it, we're in the middle of the quarter planning the next one, or at the end of the quarter doing a retrospective on how we did in the last 90 days. And it was exhausting, probably the best word for it. It felt like we were constantly, there was no long-term view. And we actually had feedback when we sent out some surveys to staff. We actually had some feedback saying, I'm really struggling to see sort of the long-term vision and plan for the company.
Yes.
I mean, we have one, and we communicated at that one time, at that one meeting, like many, many months ago. But everything else that they hear is like, okay, previous 90 days, next 90 days, previous 90 days. And so, of course, that feels quite whiplashy, I think is probably the best word for it.
The exact word that we literally got feedback. Like we have a feedback module in our tool. We send it out at the end of every kickoff, and we would hear that word. It was like, I feel like I have whiplash every quarter, where it's like, I'm exhausted at the end of the quarter, and now I'm expected to like immediately pop back up and just start again 90 days later.
And so the annual, moving to annual was almost the antithesis of my nature, because I like the idea of the ability to pivot. And so I had to give myself grace to say, if we're going to go out and say, here's the annual plan with the quarterly objectives, it doesn't mean they're locked in stone. I guess they're like wet concrete. Like we can kind of adjust them and pivot as we went. But it forced me to do thinking and do what is not in my nature to do, which is look much further ahead. And so I think that was not only good for me and the exec team, I think it was great for the company. And so we did that for the first time 6 to 8 weeks ago. And I think I know it was the best session we've ever had in terms of casting vision and creating the plan for where we're going. And now it holds us accountable to those things too, which I think that was a good thing for us to do.
Yeah, we got great feedback from the team that said, this was so helpful to see 12 months out how the executive team is thinking about it. And that doesn't mean that we just rolled out the themes. Well, not for Q1. For Q1, we had very clear objectives. But for Q2, 3, and 4, it was just, hey, this is the general theme that we're thinking about, and here's where we want to be at the end of this year. That really helped.
Frank's point, Holly, it wasn't easy. Like, how many offsites did we do? How many Zooms?
A lot. Well, I mean, we meet as an executive team twice a week for an hour and a half minimum. And talk about this all the time. Not to mention, I think we have 2 or 3 like dedicated half days to a day just to talk about the annual plan.
And there's a lot of conflict in those meetings because everyone's trying to advocate for my thing is the most important thing. And other people are saying, well, if that doesn't happen, is it catastrophic for the company? And so it is a process of whittling down. It's almost like, I imagine it's like carving like out of granite or marble. You start with a big block and then you whittle it out, and then eventually the statue takes shape. But it takes a lot of like whittling down and carving out to get to that spot.
That's a great analogy. So we've used a lot of different frameworks. I think when I first came on board, we were using OGSM, which stands for objectives, goals,
strategies, measures.
Which I think from day one, I was like, these are all synonyms to me. Like, what's the difference between objectives, goals, strategies, and measures? Like, I'm so confused. So we did that for a couple quarters, and it felt very, I just felt like I was trying to come up with these things that fit into these boxes so that I didn't quite understand the difference. Then we switched to OKRs, which was a bit more simple, which is objectives and key results. But where I felt tension on those was everything has to be measurable, like quantitatively.
Yes.
And there's so much, especially in a startup, but I think in business in general, that you can't quantify.
Not
And
everything can be measured. Sometimes they can, but not everything.
yeah. And I think I know for me, I felt like it held me back a bit to feel like I had to have this measurable result for everything, especially because in marketing, everything's an experiment.
Yeah.
So
And you said, Holly, it put us in a box.
yeah.
To the fact that we're trying to quantify everything, it felt like we got put in a box, and it also maybe you were going to say this, it's like it forces you to not experiment or push the boundaries as much because you know there's going to be ROI attached to it, and so you don't do as much like crazy big risks.
Yeah, I learned that from Dan Steinman, one of our board members, who was one of the like original members of Gainsight, which is a very successful customer success platform. And he encouraged me on that like there are times, especially in marketing, where you should not tie a number to it.
Yeah.
You just have to be aligned with the CEO that like, hey, we're going to invest this money and we think that this is going to happen, but we just need to take the risk and see if we get a return on that.
What was the story, Holly? Because he put on a big event and you asked him how he justified the cost, because I think they spent millions of dollars on it, right?
Yep. It was a user conference where they brought in 50 to, well, I think when they started it, it was only like 20 people. And then over a few years, it grew to about 70 people. And the CEO and he were just adamant that like, we are intentionally not going to try to measure the ROI of this.
Yeah.
But then of course, looking back like a year, 2 years later, they could draw a direct line back to their growth because of that event and bringing their customers together. So,
and I don't think that can be everything like that. You can't say that every single time, but there are a certain amount of big bets that you can make. And I call it like, you just know it and you know it. Like,
yeah.
I might not have all of the perfect description of what the ROI is on this big bet, on this project, on this initiative, but I just know in my knower, and this is the one thing I'm going to stake my claim on for this quarter or for this year. And that was one for them. And then there's certainly been ones that we're pioneering here too.
I'm going to restate that in an American accent. So
Nowhere.
Nowhere. Know it in your knower.
What did I sound like? Like Noah?
Know it in your know. It sounded like you said know it in your know because the is so soft.
Thank you for the translation.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so so I feel like when this clicked for our executive team was about 7 or 6 months ago, I guess. We've known about the Table Group and Patrick Lencioni for a long time. Many of us were raving fans before we even came to Leadr, but we solidified our partnership with them. And so we were really digging into the advantage and the 4 disciplines of organizational health. And the framework that Pat introduces is that your thematic goal, like your rally cry, which is what you're galvanizing the whole team or company around, which is the answer to what's most important right now. Yeah. And then being able to pick defining objectives, which to this conversation about like being too much in a box or too loosey-goosey, I just think defining objectives are a wonderful addition to strategic planning because it's supposed to be qualitative. The point is that you might not be able to measure it, but these are just like what Frank says, these are the 4 to 5 things that if you don't accomplish, and Pat usually says it's like, about 90 days or so, like 3 to 6 months, your thematic goal should not be more than about 3 to 6 months. I don't know why I'm struggling with that. And your defining objectives are, if these 4 to 5 things don't get done in the next 3 to 6 months, it will be detrimental to our business. And so that's been helpful for us. And then you have the standard operating objectives that are like the things that keep the lights on. And these are quantitative. These are like money in the bank and revenue coming in and facilities or like whatever it might be for your business. And that has truly been a game changer for us. I think for me, like having the rally cry, and we always create a hashtag around our rally cry so we can use it in Slack. Like right now it's Be to Sherpa, because we really want to make sure that we are helping and guiding and coaching our customers. And that infiltrates everything we do for that quarter. So it's been a game changer for me. I mean, what do you think, Matt, about us switching to that model?
It was challenging at first because it's wildly different than the other models that we use. One of them that was really challenging for our team was it's more of a horizontal planning structure than a vertical one. And what I mean by that is it transcends a product, sales, marketing, finance, operations planning format. Those are good and they have their place, but a defining objective is not a customer success objective. It's not a sales objective or an operations objective. It is a company objective. And so once we deputized, if you will, once we deputized our owners of those defining objectives to say, you are not owning this as the head of sales, the head of marketing, the head of customer success. You're owning this as a big rock that requires horizontal or company-wide involvement. It was kind of uncomfortable, and it was a habitual change for us at first, because we were all like, wait a second, am I speaking as the marketing leader, or am I speaking as the leader of this objective? And does that mean that now I get to like jump in and poke holes in different parts of areas that I don't really have direct responsibility over? And the answer is 100% yes, because it's the only way we get things done. So that was a really good change for us. And like you say, and like Frank was saying, it forced us to get really focused and simple and say no to a lot of the noise. And narrowing it down to 4 to 5 has been really tough.
Yes, it is so tough. And yeah, because we took the 5 dysfunctions assessment together, and then Pat came and worked with our executive team. And one of the things that came up out of that 5 dysfunctions assessment was that we were so siloed. And I think it was because we had been doing strategic planning with like, Holly's the owner of this. Here's the KPI that she's going to be responsible for, and don't bother her. And Garrett's going to be over this, and don't bother him. And, you know, and like you said, it was vertically aligned, but not horizontally.
And it was vertically, the communication was vertical and the accountability was vertical. So what does that look like? Well, Holly is accountable to Matt, the CEO. Holly, the head of marketing, is accountable to Matt, the CEO, for all things related to lead gen and opportunity creation and anything related to brand and partnerships. So Matt and Holly talk offline about that. Garrett, the head of sales, was accountable to Matt and as the CEO, again, vertically just on the sales numbers. And so all the conversations were happening behind the scenes. And then once we changed the format and we brought it to to kind of a group discussion, which is way more uncomfortable, but much more effective, we actually became much, much more efficient and effective as a team.
Yes, 100%. And aligned. And our relationship got so much better, even though there were healthy conflict in those meetings. We felt closer. I feel closer to my teammates than I ever have, because we're surfacing it all together and truly operating as a team and not individual. He said, he called us CXOs, that when we're in our executive team meetings, we're CXOs, not CMO, COO, CFO, et cetera.
Yeah, executive, generic executive hat first.
Yes. And we often call each other out for that now. Like, you know, I don't know, Brett, you're wearing your CFO hat. You need to wear your CXO hat, you know? So.
And here's what convinced me, because we've always taught the myth is like, correct in private, have the tough conversations behind closed doors. But here's the fallacy to that. If Matt and Holly need to have an eye-to-eye conversation about marketing performance, everyone else in the room knows that marketing's not performing, but the conversation's happening offline. But then everyone else in the room is going, did it happen? How did it go? How blunt were they? What was the resolution? Did they argue about it? Were they as candid as I wanted to have been? And then you come back next week and they're like, I wonder if Matt and Holly are fighting at the moment. Like, let's tiptoe around marketing this week. We'll give them a pass. And then next week, everything will be fine. And so you actually play into the opposite of clarity is kindness. People, like, their imaginations are often worse than reality. And so when we actually just had that conversation as a group and we're bringing that conversation into the team environment, it created a lot less sideways energy, I think, is the best description for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you meant to say there is clarity is kindness.
Clarity is kindness. Yeah,
for sure. The opposite of clarity is unkindness and unknown. Because like you say, a lot of times you say, when clarity lacks, negativity fills the void.
Exactly right.
What you're saying, like that happens when you take things offline, because people lack clarity of like, ooh, what really happened? Is Holly in trouble? What, you know? And so they're always going to assume the negative because we're humans. So it's really good. One thing that came to mind when Frank was talking about, you know, really choosing the right gears. And one of the ones that when he was CEO of Home Depot that he chose was customer service, and being in the stores more than any CEO had ever been in the stores. And so can you think of an initiative that you've picked, or we as an executive team has picked, to really try to figure out what are those frontline issues. Because in my experience, I found that like by the time I pick up on something on our executive team, I'm like, oh, that's really good. The rest of the team's like, yeah, Holly,
Yeah.
we noticed that 6 months ago. Where you
Yeah.
been? You know, because we're just so removed.
Yeah.
So yeah, can you think of an example of that, like of a gear that you've had to pick to try to really get clarity on the front lines?
Yeah, so I love this example because Frank came in and one of the key gears that they wanted to solve for was customer service. They knew that they had a customer service problem. And so instead of just going out and running through a bunch of initiatives, the first thing he did was customer visits, which I think that's powerful. And so we had ourselves in a similar position. We thought we're going to go out and build all these new features, and everyone's got very strong opinions about what should be on the roadmap. And they were all opinion based about what I wanted and what I thought was the right idea. They weren't actually rooted so much in reality of what's best for our customers. And so was this about a year ago, Holly? And we're
I
doing
think
it again
so.
now. We had a quarterly theme called Closer to the Customer. And every single staff member, no matter what role you were in, whether you were an engineer, whether you were in finance, whether you were in operations, had to jump on a customer call and have an interaction directly with customers and ask a few questions so that we could get closer to the customer. And we had a Slack channel where everyone had to say, hey, I'm raising my hand to put my name down. And then every week we would report, hey, we've still got 20 people left. We've got 10 people left. And it worked. Every single person talked to a customer. Every single person had a much clearer understanding of what they needed from our product and from our services. And we were much, much better for it. We're actually we're doing that again this quarter. Everyone's going to jump on and get close to the customer again.
Yeah, it was so helpful because I think especially for our teammates who aren't in a customer focused or facing role, like our product and engineering team, which is such a big part of our company, but they're not on calls all day, every day with customers. They're writing code, like building the thing. And then our operations and finance team, who are making sure that all the trains are running on time, but aren't interacting with our customers. I know that it was really helpful for them to get insight into what is really going to help move the needle for our customers around people development. So,
and then so to close the loop in your question, Holly, you can't pick the 4 to 5 gears until you're close enough to your customer to know what the priorities really should be. And so that was an eye-opening moment for me because, like you say, sometimes it's really easy to be out of touch and be that sort of head in the sand leader. And getting out of your office and interacting directly with the frontline team members or with customers, that's when you really find out what is most important, and that will indicate what your 4 to 5 gears should be.
That's awesome. Okay, so let me see if I can recap some actionable insights that I learned. So first of all, the big question that you started with, which was, how do you know the 4 to 5 to pick? And Frank really encouraged us to get on the front lines yourself as the leader to really understand what are the things that are holding your business back. And I love that he really focuses on like revenue drivers, and you might not be in a business, maybe you're in a nonprofit or education, but what are the things that are holding back your organization from growth or health? Is a way to think about it. So get on the front lines as the senior leader. It's up to you to really boots on the ground and figure it out. But that doesn't mean that you're doing it yourself. So then he challenged us that, it's your executive team in the room, and maybe it's more than just your executive team. I mean, especially for an organization like Home Depot, I'm sure he brought in leaders from all over the company to really get a broad understanding before they narrowed it down to the 4 to 5 things. And then he had that really hot take there at the very end where he said, don't improve everything you touch, was one of the things that he told his team all the time, which sounds so counterintuitive, but that is so powerful to make sure that there is clarity of focus, that we can worry about that next quarter, but for this quarter, we are focused on these 4 to 5 things and that only. So anything that stuck out to you that I missed, Matt?
Just that last line, we have a tongue-in-cheek saying here at Leadr, which is, that's next month's problem. And we say it a little bit cheekily, but truly it allows us to be focused on the thing that we said we would do this month and not get distracted by the problem that happens next month. Last thing, to quote Yellowstone, I've been rewatching it recently because it's so dang good. And one of the quotes in that show from Kevin Costner is, that's the good thing about problems. They'll still be here tomorrow. And I think that's so true. The problems don't go away. And if they do go away, they might not have been that important anyway.
So good, Matt. That's awesome. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Leadr Pulse podcast. We'd love to hear from you. What actionable insights are you taking away from today's conversation? You can email us at hello@leadr.com. That's hello@leadr.com. You can also pick up Matt and Chris's book, Management is Dead, where we go deeper into these concepts of what does it look like for people to not be managed, but instead led and developed? Because we believe that people development is what drives performance. So check out our website at leadr.com, that's leadr.com, where you can subscribe to Leadr Pulse, our weekly email update where you can hear all about our podcasts and all that we're up to here at Leadr. We'll see you next time.